Welcome back to Let's Talk About That. Today, I'm going to start a two-part series that will challenge what you think you know about development, poverty, and national progress. In the 1970s, China and Nigeria stood at similar starting points as far as economic development was concerned. But today, one is the second largest economy in the world, and the other is still struggling to provide basic services to its people. The big question is, what happened? Why did China surge ahead while Nigeria fell behind? In part one, I will go back to the 1970s and trace the early decisions that set both countries on completely different paths. So let us do what I call a surprising comparison between China and Nigeria in the 1970s. In 1978, China's GDP per capita was just $156, while Nigeria's GDP per capita was $520. In other words, Nigeria's GDP per capita was more than 3 times higher than that of China. Nigeria had oil wealth, fertile land, and a relatively small population of 70 million. China, on the other hand, had over 900 million people, most of them living in poverty. China was then recovering from political chaos. By every measure imaginable, Nigeria should have been more successful than China. However, everything began to change for China in 1978. Deng Xiaoping introduced a new policy, which he called reform and opening up policy. This policy meant that farmers could now keep and sell surplus produce. Before now, farmers in China could only belong to collectives which were controlled by the communist government. China then created special economic zones like Shenzhen, which welcomed foreign investors. Finally, China massively encouraged export-oriented manufacturing, and this became the engine of growth. The emphasis was not about ideology or party. Instead, it was about results. At about the same time, Nigeria was enjoying the oil boom and consequently missed the opportunity to grow. Nigeria's story in the late 1970s was very different. Oil revenues exploded from 1.4 billion US dollars in 1973 to over 22 billion in 1980. So in 7 short years, Nigeria's revenue grew by about over 1,400%, or about 48.09% per year. But instead of diversifying the economy, Nigeria became dependent on crude oil. Agriculture was neglected. Cocoa, palm oil, and groundnut exports collapsed completely. Local manufacturing industries shrank under the pressure of cheap imports. Much of the oil money went into short-lived projects. A lot went into uncontrolled consumption of foreign goods, and a large portion was also unfortunately lost to inefficiency. China decided to develop infrastructure, building roads, ports, railways, and power plants to serve industry. Today, China has over 40,000 kilometers of high-speed rail and produces 2,200 gigawatts of electricity. Today, Nigeria has less than 200 kilometers of barely functional rail, and under 5 gigawatts of electricity for over 200 million people. Now, let's look at how education and human capital development fared in the two countries. China treated education as an economic investment. They saw it as a national business. Literacy rose from 65% in 1982 to over 97% today. In Nigeria, literacy also rose, but the rate was not astronomical. Today, literacy is about 62%, with schools being underfunded and plagued by strikes. Universities produce half-baked graduates, many of whom lack skills for modern industries. By the early 1990s, the gap was already clear. China was exporting electronics and machinery, and Nigeria was importing those same goods, paying for them with oil money. Well, in part two, I will dig deeper into the 5 key pillars that fueled China's rise. And I will also look at the structural weaknesses that are holding Nigeria back today. But all hope is not lost. In part two, I will also discuss the urgent actions Nigeria must take to get out of this mess and lift millions of our people out of poverty. So, stay tuned and don't miss part two. The real lessons are just beginning. See you there.